The six of them have been friends forever until the game-changing moment.
Alex, I love you!
What's happening here?
Come with me.
I'm sorry. I can't do this.
But when friends have been together this long, nothing can break them up.
Great news. We are back together. Here we go again.
Another double bloody.
You'll do whatever it takes to keep the good times rolling.
Let's go, ladies. It's time to blast our glutes.
Best night ever.
A comedy about lovers
Did she say the sex was bad?
Every relationship.
and friends.
None of us has made a new friend in like 11 years.
Happy endings. Saturday night at 9 on Channel 96 ViuTV6.
Good evening, I'm Joel Flynn in Hong Kong. Welcome to the late edition of ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. You are the light. Filipino words fit for a US president as Donald Trump wraps up his tour of Asia. Real estate giant Linkrate is under fire again, this time from doctors who say their independent clinics are being forced out of housing estates. And the death toll from an earthquake that struck Iran and Iraq climbs to at least 336. Good evening. Donald Trump has vaunted the success of his trip to Asia as he brings the curtain down on what he called a fruitful regional tour. The US president today met with ministers from Southeast Asian countries at the ASEAN summit in Manila. He also held bilateral talks with Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte, who not only lavished Trump with praise, but sang him a song in which he said, "The light of my world." Ryan Brooks has more.
A rowdy reception for Donald Trump in the Philippines on Monday, protesters rallying against the U.S. president and their own leader, Rodrigo Duterte, as the two headed in for talks at the ASEAN summit in Manila. Crowds marched on the American embassy, clashed with police, and burned an elaborate effigy shaped like a swastika. However, inside the summit, things appeared to go a lot more smoothly.
We've had a great relationship. This has been very successful.
Trump and Duterte's meeting was the most anticipated talk of the day. From the summit, Reuters' John Chalmers explains why.
Although the previous U.S. administration under Obama was very critical of Duterte for his war on drugs, Donald Trump seems to be taking a much softer line. They came out and they said that they had a very strong and good relationship, and I'm sure that that will dismay a lot of people in Washington and, of course, dismay a lot of human rights defenders and others who have been outraged at the thousands of people who've been killed in Duterte's war on drugs.
The Philippines is the final stop of Trump's tour of Asia. Adding to some of the memorable moments of his trip, on Sunday night, this happened. A rare karaoke appearance from Duterte, apparently at the request of the U.S. Commander-in-Chief.
Well, for more on the summit, our Southeast Asia correspondent Melanie Ralph sent us this update.
Well, among the issues that were going to be discussed at ASEAN, the South China Sea was probably what most observers thought would top the agenda. Rodrigo Duterte, though, has clearly tried to avoid this topic altogether, instead focusing more on regional terrorism threats. Now, ASEAN nations themselves are largely at odds with China over its claim on the waterway, which is one of the world's busiest. That's perhaps no surprise, as Duterte has grown closer to China since he took office last year. Vietnam, meanwhile, is the country that has emerged as Beijing's main challenger in that area. The draft statement we have seen from the summit suggests that tensions over territorial claims aren't as high as they have been. But clearly, while the situation is notably calmed, peace, stability and freedom of navigation are things that very few, if any, of the ASEAN nations themselves are taking for granted.
Well, arguably the most tension over the South China Sea lies between Beijing and Hanoi. That was where Xi Jinping and Vietnamese President Tran Dai Quang held a bilateral meeting today. It was Xi's first overseas trip since being re-elected as president at the party congress last month. Relations between the two countries have been particularly strained since July, when China put pressure on Vietnam to stop oil drilling in a disputed area in the South China Sea. Donald Trump yesterday told Vietnam he was prepared to mediate between China and other claimants to the waterway.
China and Vietnam are both pursuing the policies led by our communist parties, as well as following the path of socialism. We have strengthened our cooperation to be able to prosper together, to benefit the people of our countries, and at the same time to benefit the region as well as the world's stability, prosperity, and peace.
Military exercises by the United States and South Korea have taken place in the region. Meanwhile, 3 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups have held drills off South Korea's east coast, the first time that's happened in the area in a decade. The move is a rare show of force and comes as Trump has continued loud warnings about the nuclear threat from North Korea during his tour of Asia. South Korean naval vessels also participated in the drill. Pyongyang said on Saturday that Trump's trip showed he had begged for war on the Korean peninsula. Local news now, and Link REIT is facing fresh criticism, this time from doctors. The real estate giant is blamed for depriving poorer citizens of medical support by forcing out private practitioners in public housing estates with radical rent hikes. Around a third of the shopping malls that Link REIT manages in public estates no longer have independently operated clinics. One doctor who's been running a clinic in Ma On Shan may be forced to shut his business after Link announced a major makeover there and refused to allocate him a new slot. Another said he's now paying more than $70,000 for one of his clinics in Wong Tai Sin, 7 times the price he paid when the mall was still managed by the housing authority.
We have to lift clinical fees to catch up when our rents are raised multiple fold. So as a result, it's putting a heavier burden on poorer people, and they would have to resort to public hospitals. This contradicts Chief Executive Carrie Lam's current policy in strengthening healthcare at the community level.
Elsewhere in health news, the government has today issued a new set of guidelines to doctors on how to prescribe antibiotics. It comes amid a growing global and local concern about bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. The Centre for Health Protection has published a guide to 3 common types of infection. It tells doctors about which signs showing viral infections should warrant the use of antibiotics. It also advises on prescription dosage and duration.
Hopefully this is form the first step, okay, in the appropriate use of antibiotics. I'm quite sure, actually I'm pretty sure that they will follow it, you see, to the best benefit of their patients.
The cost of building the Sha Tin Central Rail Link could run over budget by more than $2 billion, according to a lawmaker. After visiting the site with the rest of LegCo's transport panel, lawmaker Michael Tien estimated the total cost would be $10 billion, 25% more than originally planned. MTR said 90% of the works for the first part of the link is now complete, and train services for that line are expected to begin on schedule in mid-2019. Work is still underway for the second section, which will bring passengers in the north all the way to the island side and won't be completed until 2021. The Ombudsman has slammed the government for failing to properly test fruit and vegetables that are imported into the city. The watchdog said lab tests on most of the imported produce could take up to 19 working days. It said that by then the food would have already been bought and eaten. It also said spot checks on vegetable-carrying lorries at the Mang Kam Tow control point were too sloppy. Ombudsman Connie Lau added that officials should tighten checks on traces of heavy metals in the food.
For the control of lead, is the heavy metal. Now we are still talking about a standard which is 20 times of the international standard by the Codex. This is one. And the second one is about the metallic contaminants in food. They are not, I think the regulation is not updated in the past 20 years. So we do think that governments should speed up their pace in order.
There was a scare at the US consulate in Central this morning after it received an envelope containing white powder. Authorities confirmed around noon that the suspicious substance wasn't harmful. The false alarm had led to a suspension of consular services for the day. All people inside the block were evacuated after the parcel was discovered. Police officers conducted an investigation there at around 9 a.m. in full protective gear. The consulate said services are expected to resume tomorrow and visa applicants should reschedule their appointments. To the latest on the Philippine government's temporary suspension in processing the visas of domestic workers, local recruitment agencies are urging the country to exempt Hong Kong from the freeze. In a meeting with employment agents, the Philippine Labour representative here said they've received reports of helpers being trafficked to other countries. The officials said the move is part of a corruption probe within the country's Labour office and that it doesn't target Hong Kong. It's believed authorities are also looking into 4 agencies here over suspicion of illegal practices. All right, coming up next, the latest from the world of business. All right, we start with a look at the local markets first. The HSI got off to a positive start this week despite a weakness across the region. The market touched a 10-year high at one point before closing up 0.2% at 29,182 points. Tech shares helping drive the gains here, while mainland banks also lent support. Meanwhile, investors gave gaming hardware maker Razer a big thumbs up on its stock market debut. Razer's shares rose as much as 42% in the latest sign of hot demand for new tech listings. Backed by Li Ka-shing, the company plans to use the IPO proceeds to develop new verticals in the gaming and digital entertainment industry and to fund acquisitions as it expands its ecosystem. Uber says it's entered into a deal with a consortium led by SoftBank and Dragoneer on a potential investment. It comes after board members struck a peace deal to allow the investments to go ahead. It also resolved a legal battle between former chief executive Travis Kalanick and a key shareholder. The Uber board first agreed more than a month ago to bring in SoftBank as an investor and board member, but negotiations stalled because of fighting between venture capital firm Benchmark and Kalanick over governance changes. Sources say the deal could be worth as much as $10 billion, which would give early investors like Benchmark the opportunity to cash out at a very lucrative rate. A big bit of investment in the skies as well. Emirates on Sunday unveiled a preliminary order worth $15 billion for 40 Boeing jets. Chairman Sheikh Ahmed bin Zayed Al Maktoum said the carrier chose the latest version of Boeing's mid-sized wide-body jet after comparing it with the Airbus A350. Boeing landed the order even as business confidence in the region has wobbled, but Sheikh Ahmed said the deal was proof the region's hub aviation model was working.
Our announcement today also speaks to our confidence in the future of aviation in the UAE and the region. And this new planes that we have just ordered